Who is a person that everyone thought was crazy, but they ended up being right? Alfred Wegener, who first proposed continental drift, what would ultimately become plate tectonics. Geologists of the day considered him an outsider and rejected his theory. Christine Collins, famously portrayed by Angelina Jolie in the movie Chongling. After her son was abducted, the police found him months later and reunited them. But Christine was adamant that it wasn't her son Walter and was an imposter. Even though she had evidence to prove it, she was temporarily committed by the officer in charge of the case, and even after the kid admitted he lied and wasn't Walter, it still took over a week to release Christine. Kotaku Wamura. He was the longtime mayor of the Japanese town of Fudai 1940s-1980s. While mayor, he learned that the town had been devastated in the past by tsunamis. He literally saw the bodies from one of the disasters and ordered the construction of an enormous sea wall. While other towns in the area also had sea walls, this thing was considered insanely high overkill. The project was hideously expensive and he was relentlessly mocked. He died in 1997. In 2011, a tsunami struck Japan, killing 20,000 people. The seawall worked as planned, protecting Fudai, and the town escaped almost untouched. Some of the elderly patients with dementia in a home in my city kept complaining they weren't given food. Everyone thought they must have forgotten that they'd already eaten, as people with dementia sometimes do. Nope. Turns out some pieces of shit nursing staff didn't always give everyone their meals, amongst other abuse. Gustave Caillebotte. He was born to a wealthy Parisian family in 1848. His father owned a textile business that he later inherited. He was an artist in his own right, but became much more known as a supporter of the arts. Fearful he'd die young, he writes in his will that the French state accept his large art collection, today valued at several $billion, and hang art from several Impressionist artists, who were friends of his, in a national museum upon his death. Caillebotte dies young in 1894 as he predicted, and so his will attempts to be executed. The French government initially refuses the request. Pundits and critics, from art to politics, view the request as absurd and publicly say how repulsed they are by the collection itself. Several art professors from École des Beaux-Arts threaten to resign if the government enacts the will. In the end, half of Caillebotte's art collection gets hung in 1897 at the Musée du Luxembourg, and the public comes out in droves to visit the gallery because of all the press Caillebotte's request had received after his death. People wanted to see this ugly art. The artists featured. Their names were Monet, Renoir, Degas, Cézanne, Manet, Pissarro, and Sisley. It's very possible these artists would never have become the household names they are today had Caillebotte not liked the ugly, unsellable art that a few of these friends of his made. Writer Ernest Hemingway was convinced the FBI had him under surveillance. His friends and family told him he was nutters, until some unsealed records a while back proved that he actually was being followed, had his phones bugged, etc. Sister Kenny and her physical therapy for polio victims. The treatment at the time was to lock up the affected limbs in braces or casts, leaving the patient crippled for life. Her idea of using hot compresses and gently moving the limbs took a very long time to be accepted by the medical establishment, as she was a woman and just a nurse. Ludwig Boltzmann. His equations and formulas explained the physical properties of matter, but as it went against the then accepted laws of physics, he was ridiculed and ignored for years while fighting for atom theory to be accepted. He took his own life just 3 years before Ernest Rutherford discovered the nucleus of an atom, proving Boltzmann's theory. Lindy Chamberlain Creighton. A dingo really did eat her baby. Ignaz Semmelweis. In 1846, Semmelweis proposed the idea that hand-washing could prevent the spread of disease in hospitals. He was ridiculed during his time, sent to a mental asylum, and died forgotten by his peers. Barry James Marshall was one of the scientists who discovered that the bacteria H. pylori causes stomach ulcers. However, getting people to believe it was difficult. It was thought that lifestyle and excessive stomach acid were the main factor that lead to ulcers, so when he suggested that a bacterial infection could cause it, no one believed him. In response, he infected himself with H. pylori by drinking cultures, which in turn gave himself stomach ulcers, and then treated the infection. He and Robin Warren received a Nobel Prize for this discovery. Harlem J. Bretz was a geologist who in the 1920s proposed that the geologic features of the channeled scablands of eastern and central Washington were the result of a massive flood during the last ice age 15,000 years ago, when a glacial dam in northern Idaho catastrophically collapsed, releasing the waters of Lake Missoula. Lake Missoula is estimated to have contained a volume of water equivalent to Lakes Erie and Ontario combined, and the resulting flood through what is now eastern Washington and out through the Columbia Gorge released a water flow exceeding the combined flow of all other rivers on the planet. Bretz was soundly ridiculed when he proposed this scenario in the 1920s, but was eventually vindicated over the next 50 years and was eventually awarded the Geological Society of America's prestigious Penrose Medal in 1979 at the age of 96. By that time, as he put it, all his detractors were dead, so he had no one left to gloat over. Jose Canseco was one of the first players to openly discuss how prevalent steroid use was in the 90s 2000s, and people dismissed his claims as being from a player on decline just trying to stay relevant. My grandma. She insisted people kept stealing her newspaper, and specifically said it was someone in a white van. Grandma was always a little off, so we just thought she was paranoid and had a bad delivery person. Until one day my mom and I are driving past her house and a white van in front of us stopped, stole my grandma's newspaper, and drove off. Grandma wasn't crazy after all, at least not about that. Jackie Stewart. He was sick and tired of burying his friends due to racing accidents, so he started advocating for safety at the tracks, in the cars, and pushing for more qualified medical personnel. He once said, "I'd be more popular if I would shut up and drive." Dead, but more popular. Stewart was a 3x world champion, for the record. He also won on the hardest track ever built, the Nürburgring Nordschleife, by 4 minutes with a broken wrist. The man was as hard a racer as they come, and yet he was ridiculed for not wanting to see himself and others get injured or killed while racing. Many of the things Stewart pushed for then are requirements at nearly every racing event today. Rose McGowan. She was talking crazy shit about people following her and ex-Mossad agents being involved. She was dismissed as insane. Turns out, Weinstein had an army of spies. He had following victims to keep them quiet, including the exact people she had described.